When I came to Costa Rica, my job was to take charge of a nursery for the production of quinine. And the road to that nursery was not suitable for vehicles of a great portion of it, so that I had a choice of walking or riding a horse. Well, I preferred walking. And the first thing I noticed as I started along the road was a wild impatiens. I didn't really know impatiens in those days, but this was a charmer. And I discovered that they were in all the fence rows in the whole area around. They were so attractive, a great range of colors, that I decided that if I had an opportunity, I would like to do some breeding work on them. The main reason that I decided I would try to work with it was that the natural color range was great. There was all shades of pink, salmons, rose, and light reds and orange. But no, I never found a white one in the wild, nor did I ever find a real red one. But their other colors were so attractive, and the plant was so vigorous, so well adapted to wet tropical conditions, that I thought that might be helpful in the gardens in the north. And for that reason, I decided to, when I could, to start working on it. The creation of F1 hybrid corn caused a revolution in plant breeding worldwide. It was the results from hybridizing corn were so spectacular that people began to think of whether it could be a general process or not. And it turned out that F1 hybrids were very special in certain characteristics that I believe to this day have not been thoroughly explained. The hybrids are extremely vigorous and tolerate stress, tolerate drought, and other characters which would normally be seriously affect the plant itself. That that inspired other breeders to try F1 hybrids in other crops. F1 hybrid actually means that it is a cross between two unrelated parental lines that give a product that is intermediate or may be similar to one of the parents, but is much more vigorous. The first hybrid released was Ballerina, a grandiflora salmon, which proved to be very popular and continued to be produced for something like 20 years. It was still in production in around 1980. And the year it was introduced, it won an All-America Selection Award in 1953. Another one that won at the same time, won an award, was the Multiflora Comanche. The first red petunia was an F1 hybrid. I had the feeling that the Impatiens then being produced were really not very good, and they were not very appealing to the public, so that the sales were very limited. So I determined to try to get something that would be much more floriferous, dwarfer, and easier to handle with good seed germination. And of course, in those days, our company had been established for the production of F1 hybrid petunia doubles. And that led eventually to the F1 hybrid grandiflora petunias. F1 hybrids were so much more vigorous than the open pollinated field-grown seeds that it seemed to us that it was worth pursuing for everything that would lend itself to that process. And for that reason, I set out immediately to introduce the Impatiens as F1 hybrids. After discovering the habit of plant I wanted in this one set of crosses, it became necessary to incorporate that same habit, or rather incorporate colors into that same habit, so that I had to make crosses of all the different colors on this original first progeny. Usually this process is tedious, and if we have to make 6 or 7 generations, it generally means 6 or 7 years. But in the case of Impatiens, the life cycle is rather short. One can sow seeds, and from those seeds can obtain seeds again in something like 4 months. so that I was able, I pushed these along, and I was able to get 2 or 3 generations a year from the first plantings, and to the effect that it only took me about 4 years to get most of the colors lined up. There was one color that gave me some problems, pink, but eventually I was able to get a project that was 100% pink. But by the time that took to about 1966 before I had the sufficiently uniform to think about marketing them. Actually, I did the work in the open field at first. We made the pollinations inside, but we grew the plants out in the open field. They perform very well in Costa Rica in full sun. But I made crosses between all the material that I could get, anything that seemed to me to be appropriate to try. Much to my surprise, among those first crosses, one hybrid turned out to be virtually spectacular. We eventually named them Elf, and all of those modern impatiens these days are derived from that one particular hybrid. I set out, when I discovered it, I set out to incorporate all the other colors possible in this same habit of plant, same type of plant. Therefore, we had close to what I actually originally wanted, a dwarf, compact, very floriferous impatiens. There's prevalent an idea that I started my work using the wild impatiens as a basis to start. Actually, that is not true. I used cultivated material, which I obtained from such sources as were available, and seeds from the ones that were on the market as seed. I did not use the wild impatiens originally. They were the inspiration for my work, but I did not actually use them until in later generations. I did use some to obtain new colors, but that was in subsequent years after they had been put on the market. After having obtained the 8 separate colors that I wanted, and in an acceptable uniformity, the next question came up as to would they be saleable. This was something entirely new. It was an impatiens that was far different from anything else on the market, much dwarfer and much more free flowering. So it was necessary to test it in the market area. Costa Rica is a long way from the market area, and I had to determine whether its performance in the north was satisfactory. At that time, the only possibilities that I had were to try them in 2 universities. So I sent samples to Michigan State University and to Purdue University to have them grown in their flower trials for an appraisal. Both came back at the end of the year that yes, they thought that they were suitable for market. So the next process was sending them to George J. Ball, which was the company that put them on the market. They, of course, had to test them too before they actually offered them in the catalog. So that eventually they got not a thorough testing, but they got a fair testing between different environments. Trialing of these was indeed rather limited, but I think that was probably current in those days. There was fire breeding, bedding plants was not widely practiced in those days. There was really the very beginning of the emphasis on bedding plants that we see these days. And criticisms have been made of inadequate testing of new introductions. In this instance, the testing was literally somewhat limited. But at that time, there was hardly any other possibility, unless one wanted to send them to several large commercial companies, which is not entirely satisfactory either. So that while the testing was limited, I think it turned out to be adequate. At least the public accepted them readily. In preparing breeding for bedding plants, it is there are certain requirements or obligations of the plant breeder that are sometimes ignored. Great testing in different environments is necessary and sometimes is not done. There are other instances where the plant itself has not been sufficiently trialed in the different environments and has not proved to be satisfactory. There is an instance also within a species which has been highly successful where the breeding has been considered satisfactory, but upon offering it to the trade has turned out to be unsatisfactory. A good instance of that was an effort to introduce a dwarf Impatiens, a dwarfer one than the super elfin, called mini Impatiens. It proved to be unsatisfactory in several different environments and had to be withdrawn from the market. Only a short period was it accepted at all. Testing is very necessary, and both internally for the breeding company as well as for the garden centers themselves. They must be tested in more than one environment, and they must be tested. Many are bred in California, for example, but California has a very, very distinct environment from most of the rest of the United States, and it does not necessarily follow that a good variety in California will be good in Chicago or will be good in Philadelphia or even in St. Louis. They must be tried there before they can really be sure of its acceptance. I would say that the process of producing these was quite simple compared to most breeding projects. It was short term relatively, because from the time I began until they were put on the market, it was only 6 years, which is really rather short for a completely unknown species to be developed and marketed. But it is possible with a short cycle such as Impatiens. There was a great deal of luck, however, in this production because of that initial first cross that turned out to be the desirable plant. One would not ever have predicted such a product from knowing the parents involved in that, so that it was surely luck. And to that extent, there's perhaps a certain part of art. The art involved, in my opinion, was in choosing the colors. The rest of it is more or less science because of the fact that we have to attend to Mendelian inheritance, and we're limited by what is possible in that sense. But from the art standpoint, the breeder does have certain choices, and in this instance, I think the major choice was in the colors. Popularity of garden flowers goes by cycles. There are periods all through history where certain species or certain varieties were very popular, so that the question has been raised as to what might follow Impatiens. There surely will be something. It's hard to predict just what. In my opinion, I think there is a recent development in pansies which might become very popular. A viola, as it is now called, but it is a revolutionary viola, by no means like the old garden viola. It is possible for this particular plant to flower freely even in the summertime. People are reluctant to accept pansies for the summer because they want them out of the way before their other garden plants. But this one might become sufficiently attractive that it could become very popular. There's a great color range possible in it, and a habit that permits free flowering all through the summer, year long. Another example of a revolutionary breakthrough would be the instance of the new variety of petunia, an interspecific hybrid, Purple Wave, which completely changes the plant habit, the flowering characteristics, almost everything involved. It almost makes it look like another species. The plant has proved to be widely acceptable and has really transformed petunias and renewed interest in petunias. There is a new procedure now becoming widely used that may change the entire appearance of garden plants in the near future. It goes by several names: biotechnical modification, or genetic engineering, or transgenic work. Those terms have all been applied to it. This involves taking certain characters from one plant or even from an animal and incorporating those characters into a garden plant. It has not yet been applied seriously to bedding plants for flowers because the market is not great and the process is extremely expensive. in spite of all of the new procedures that are being developed and have been developed, there's going to be a place for the traditional plant breeder. First of all, after the laboratory work has been done in incorporating a certain character into a garden plant, it must then be prepared for introduction to the market. That means going through the traditional plant breeding processes and testing before it's actually introduced, so that there's going to be a place for the breeder, traditional breeder, as long as I can see.